Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We have reached the 6th entry in our James Bond Retrospective series. This is the 1969 film directed by Peter R. Hunt on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Not only is this one of the most unique James Bond films in the entire legacy, there's going to be a lot of talking points tonight, I think. Not only, as I mentioned, does it stand alone in the legacy of all the James Bond films, we have a new Bond introduced into this one with George Lazenby, who we'll be talking about later on. And you might see a new face down below right there. We're very, very honored to have a guest on today, Tom Butler from the James Bond A to Z podcast, who, as he is proudly displaying in the background right there, I can see on Her Majesty's Secret Service poster right there. It's great to have you on the show, man. We really appreciate you jumping on today.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been really exciting to be invited and not get an excuse to rewatch on Her Majesty's Secret Service for the millionth time. So yeah, it's great to be here.
I was like, oh, what a shame that you had to watch this film again, right, in preparation for this film. But yeah, no, absolutely. It's great to have you on as well. We're prepared to be blinded with James Bond science and all this information that I'm sure you have on the film and insight into it. It's worked out quite well, actually, because I think you mentioned that it's in at least your top 3 James Bond films. So what perfect timing. I think it's going to be a really good discussion tonight. We're going to cover all the bases, as always, how we always structure these. It's an open discussion on the film. It will be completely spoiler filled. Luckily, I think everyone who sort of tunes in for these and comments along has seen the film at least once. So just to warn people, if you are discovering this and you haven't seen the film, what are you doing watching a review for this, an in-depth review on this film from the off? But yeah, before we get into the review itself, over to George with the socials.
Definitely, guys. As you can tell, we're not live tonight, but we still want to get your comments on the film. We'll have it premiering on the sidebar, and we'll, of course, be replying to those. So if you do like this film, let us know your thoughts in those comments. Hit that share button if you enjoy it. And if you're a Bond fan, of course, this is the place to be. We finally have our second new, well, not second new face. It's, I guess, the first face after Connery. And for those wondering why I keep waffling about faces, it's because we've got a new thumbnail design. We've updated the thumbnails, which I'm very proud to show. We now have a lovely little Bond photo on the side instead of a blurry 1969 gun barrel, which I edited many months ago. So I'm very excited that we can show off the new thumbnails. And yes, this is the place to be. As usual, if you're new to the channel, we're going to bring up some of the socials where you can find us, which is Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterboxd.com, and we have a link in the description below. And before we hand over at the end, Tom talk a little bit more, we'll bring it where we can find the AZ podcast, social medias, of course, Facebook and Twitter down below. And of course, you can stream it on Spotify and iTunes, which I thoroughly recommend doing. It's been very fun listening to this recently and learning a lot more about James Bond, which has been fantastic. So thank you for that on the side. But as always, we always start these off talking about the pre-credit sequences. A very different pre-credit sequence, because this is, of course, the new Bond, which is probably going to be the biggest talking point of the night. Sean Connery obviously did not return for this film. He resigned from the role. And in comes George Lazenby, which is, I think, this is where it's going to get interesting, because we've not spoken about a replacement Bond yet, and even more so than that, we have the only Bond to have done it once in the Eon series, which I think is really interesting. So as far as opening scenes go, it feels very much, here's a really big moment of us unveiling this new character. We have a slow build up, I think we start with M and Moneypenny, and then, where is Bond? And then we cut to him, and they're slowly revealing him, and then we get the whole beach scene, which I think perfectly sets us up for the journey. But Chris, I'm going to jump to you first. What was it like? I know this has been a while since you've seen it for the first time, but being newish to Lazenby, how do you think of the reveal with all that stuff? Because it is very interesting, I think, for a new viewer.
Yeah, no, I love the reveal to it. I love the slow build to it. You get sort of like the close-up of the chin and the cigarette and everything as he's driving the car at the beginning. I think it's the perfect way to set him up as well, because obviously I can't put myself in the shoes of what audiences would have been like at the time, but you can sort of apply it to, I don't know, like famous legacy characters from today. Whenever you have a beloved actor playing that character who is the first one, especially on the scene, playing that character, and you suddenly introduce someone else, especially George Lazenby, who had no prior acting credits to this film. This was his first one. I'm sure there were a lot of naysayers when the film came out, so I think that they had to build him up gradually. And even as the film kind of stands as well, we'll talk about some of like the little breaking the fourth wall scenes, because this film has quite a few of them where it's sort of very self-referential to Sean Connery playing the part beforehand. I like how it does cement itself. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you have the pre-title, well, the title sequence that shows clips from the previous films. You have the great moment later on where you have the moment where he reminisces over the previous gadgets that he's used in Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Thunderball. You get like the nice little music accompaniment to those moments as well. So it very much cements itself as this is a continuation, but in terms of, you know, introducing George Lazenby onto the scene, I thought it was fantastic. And, you know, we always talk about we like the over-the-top pre-credit sequences, always looking at that one with a jetpack and everything that perfectly captures Bond. This is a very different film compared to those previous ones. It's a complete breakaway from the formula that we've seen before. And I actually think that I did some reading beforehand. This is, I don't know if it is the most faithful, but they went into this with the intention of adapting this almost page for page from Ian Fleming's novel. And I think you can see that even down to that, you know, initial pre-credit sequence.
Definitely. And Tom, what do you think as well with Lazenby's sort of first scene and big reveal?
Yeah, it's really interesting the way that they do it, in terms of, you know, giving snippets of the silhouette. This is the character that you know. And it's not until, you know, a few minutes into it that you actually show that, you know, this isn't Sean Connery, this is someone new. What I think about Lazenby is that when you do finally see him, you've got to say he really looks the part. He looks, I mean, he's good looking, he's tall, he's handsome, he smokes a cigarette well. It's only really when he starts talking that it becomes a little bit wonky. But I think the way that they introduce him, I think it's really well handled. It's sort of echoed in later down the line in The Living Daylights when we first see Timothy Dalton for the first time. You see him in snippets and you sort of gradually introduce to him to sort of, you know, give you a sense of who this guy is before they fully reveal. And actually what's interesting as well is if you look at the pre-release marketing for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, is a lot of the posters show George Lazenby in silhouette. In that they're almost trying to not hoodwink the audiences, but almost to say, you know, we have a new Bond and it's just going to be like the other Bond, but they don't show what he looks like. So it's kind of a little bit misleading. And you think that might work a little bit more in, you know, in some international regions where they might not be that au fait with who's playing Bond in that particular time. And but yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting opening and such a stripped back, you know, intro to a Bond film. And I think that's really where they wanted to go with this film. In general, they wanted to take it back to basics. And we'll talk about it a bit later. But the where this film goes, I think one of the abiding things that I always think about is, you know, what would this have been like with Sean Connery? And just because of the journey that he goes on. But yeah, we can talk about that a bit more. But I think it's a smart way to introduce him bit by bit, and then when you finally see him in action, you know, he looks the part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm jumping off point from that, what you mentioned about what this would have been like with Sean Connery. When I was watching this today before this review, I had that in mind, especially watching these in sequence, I think definitely helps as well. And, you know, I love Sean Connery. I think when we did our first video on Dr. No, we said, who's your favorite Bond? And I said that, you know, mine is Connery, like iconography wise, like he is Bond to me. But I can't see this film working with Connery, in all honesty. I love Connery. I love the portrayal that he brings to the James Bond character and that sort of like quirky one-liner, you know, dropping character that he is. But I don't think it would have worked for the tone of this film, the stripped back quality, as you mentioned to it. And even with Donald Pleasance's Blofeld, who I much prefer his take on Blofeld. We don't get much of him in You Only Live Twice, but just the way that he looks and the qualities that he brought to that character are much more memorable for me than the Blofeld that we get in this one. But even then, you know, he is a very sort of like comic book kind of villain as he was in that film. And I don't think that portrayal of Blofeld would have worked for this story. So I think, well, how it turned out, whether it was, you know, intentional or unintentional, it worked that they had a different cast and sort of a different take on these characters that we'd seen in previous Bond films. But yeah, no, I love the reveal of Lazenby. I will say, if I haven't seen all of the Bonds yet, I do want to say that I haven't seen Dalton, I haven't seen Brosnan, but he is a Bond where I would have loved to have seen him sort of like grow into this role. I think that I think he was originally signed up for like a 7-picture contract or something like that, because, you know, they probably wanted a Bond to stay, really. And I think he would have developed, because this is probably one of the most, in terms of all the Bond films in the legacy, one of the most dramatic ones in terms of its script. It's one where you actually feel emotion, and it treats not just James Bond, but the Bond girl especially, compared to some of the previous entries, and even some of the side characters as well. We get some really nice moments with Moneypenny towards the end of the film. It treats all of its characters and even its side characters with so much reverence, and actually gives them something to do. There's a sense of pathos and emotion to the film. And I just don't think that would have worked had they have adhered to the previous formula, the Bond formula that we keep talking about, from Goldfinger onwards. If they'd have applied that to this film, I don't think it would have worked.
Yeah, that's a really big point for me as well, because when you look at this, certainly with Lazenby, some of the most awkward scenes I feel are him talking to M, talking to Moneypenny. And I think because as the audience, you've had that familiarity with Sean Connery for so many years, Sean Connery being flirted with Moneypenny, and suddenly there's a new Bond in town, and he's having the same conversations. Those moments can feel very jarring, which is still, as a viewer, getting used to that not being Sean Connery. And I think one of the beauties of this film is that, we get a new Bond girl in Tracy, and that you're able to have this new Bond with a new Bond girl have their own storyline with one another. One of the best stories, I'd say, sitting between a Bond and a Bond girl in the series. Blofeld has been recast as well, which I also think adds to that. This feels quite new, but it's very similar. And I think sort of growing up at sort of my age as well, seeing a lot of the Brosnan films growing up, and then Craig came in. At the age of, I think I was 11 when Casino Royale came out, I didn't know what a reboot was. I didn't know that this was a brand new, starting from scratch origin. To me, it's another Bond taking over, because we've still got the same M and Judi Dench. And I think being at the age now where I'm far more aware of the cinema and moments like that, and it's kind of on a side piece, it makes it really interesting to see what happens in No Time to Die and the future of the franchise as well. But those moments are quite strange, I think, with Lazenby. And I think maybe they were, I don't know if they're uncomfortable for any of the other cast or for the producers, but I think when this is one of the biggest films in the world, biggest one of the franchises today, as it was in the 90s, the 60s, the 70s, to the 80s, a point I'd say as well. I think what is a really big thing for me is that I always make this comparison to the Marvel films. And, years ago, I remember saying, what would it be like if with Robert Downey Jr., let's say it's Iron Man 3, Robert Downey Jr. just goes tomorrow. And then for Civil War, we're just introduced to this new guy playing, a character we've seen sort of 5 times already that everyone's familiar with. And it's amazing looking at it with a modern lens, knowing that they were able to do that. They tried it, and audience reception could be one thing, how Lazenby was on set with the others, with the producers. It's amazing to think in this world we live in now. I'd say the cinematic universe is we sign you on 7-8 picture deals, which seems to be every film now moving forwards. It's amazing to think that back in the 60s, this was still being done. And I know this is a kind of side piece, but I do always wonder that Lazenby, I think time has certainly helped, not just his performance, but this film as well. And I can imagine on release, this was a shock to the system for a lot of people. And I always jump to the general audience. If you don't, the average Joe might not know, they will know who Bond is, but they might not have known who Sean Connery was, or certain moments. I think when you're bringing in someone new to that environment, you have to really pretend nothing happened or reset the book. And I think the only thing I'll say about this kind of dabbles in a bit of both, where it feels like they're trying to move on, but at the same time, they're sort of veering towards the past. And when you think that this is the 6th film in 7 years, that is remarkable as well. When I was approached from that, so it's one of them. It's kind of strange tangent, but I think that is the Lazenby casting side of it. And of course, because it only was one film, it made it even harder in the future and over the years that they brought Connery back for Diamonds Are Forever, and he didn't get to do more. And I know that Lazenby did quit, and there are sort of many things have been said about what happened on set or some of their opinions. I think Cubby Broccoli was one of them that mentioned that he liked him as Bond, he enjoyed him on set, but I think it was more how Lazenby was in the press. And you got to think in the late 60s, early 70s, it's probably harder to get out there with opinions than it would be today with the social media. And that's what I always find fascinating when you read about sort of the public comments back then. That would have been like broadcast or a press conference to newspapers specifically. And I think that's where some of the issues are, is more of the issues seem behind the scenes with him. And I think even sort of going to how they were on set, we've got the Garlic Gate, I always call it, whether it happened or not. I know that obviously Lazenby said it didn't. It was a joke that maybe went too far with members of the press, but you've got to think for the actors back then, it was probably surreal for them to sign onto a Bond film. It's like, who's the Australian model that isn't Sean Connery? And I can imagine, especially, again, Diana Rigg, who we'll get to properly in a bit, as Tracy, one of the most iconic British actors. And, you know, I don't know how people would react to that now, that the film of a lifetime, the biggest franchise, and suddenly it's not that main guy. And I think when you read up about some of it, it's a kind of damn situation. And sorry to bring in another comparison, but it's like football. When you had like Wenger and Fergie leave Arsenal, Man U, people that have been there for 20 plus years, you didn't want to be the guy that replaced them. You wanted to be the one after that, because that person's never, unfortunately, going to get the respect, no matter what happens, that the predecessor had. And I think that's where Bond takes a really fantastic point for me. I know I've kind of gone way off point now, but it's really fascinating. I think when I read into the sort of the Bond casting stuff.
Yeah, I think in terms of the behind the scenes stuff as well, I think famously him and Peter Hunt really did not get on. I think Peter Hunt was one of the people who really saw something in Lazenby that he thought he could bring to Bond. But actually, I think once they got to set, I think there was definitely a disagreement between them. And if you read interviews with him, Lazenby sort of that are more recent to the film being released than to, you know, what he says now, then I think that's clear that like there were disagreements. He didn't get on with everyone. But I think it was really in the post-release phase of his career. The pre-release. So the build up to the premiere. I think that's when things started to really drift apart between Eon and Lazenby. And I think we've got to remember also, we often look at these things through the prism of what it is now, in that it's one film in a 24 film series, whereas at that point it was still a fledgling series. And Cubby and Harry were very, you know, bullish in they'd created this franchise. They could move on and they could bring in basically anyone to play Bond, and that was their attitude. And the thing that stopped Connery coming back was that they weren't willing to bring him in on the profit sharing. If they'd made him partner at this stage as he wanted, if they'd made him the third member of that team, you know, we might be talking here about Connery who stayed until 1983. You know, until the age he was when he did Never Say Never Again. Mm-hmm. And when you think about that and this legacy that he could have created as Bond, then that's a really tantalizing prospect. And the annoying thing is, as a fan looking back, is that On Her Majesty's Secret Service is one of the best Fleming books. And when they were making it at this stage, they still had a load of books to get through. And so this was the one that Connery really wanted to do. It was the one that they were really hyping up. And so that he walked away just before they had the opportunity to make this one. The super emotional one, the one that everyone talked about, the Bond book that makes a difference, and he didn't do it, and it could have been amazing, and yet he comes back and does Diamonds Are Forever. It's just it's devastating to think about, and when you think about this film, between You Only Live Twice and Diamonds Are Forever, two madcap, crazy James Bond films, and then you've got this one. It's somber. It's got a huge downer ending. It's got the biggest emotional storyline of any Bond film to this day, almost. Probably Casino Royale maybe challenges it, but yeah, it's mad to think about. But yeah, I mean that's the what if of George Lazenby, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, you know, Connery was a phenomenal actor, and I do think that he could have, you know, brought that drama to the piece. You know, if the script called for it, I think he could have hit those emotional beats well. I think it's just the established Connery character that we'd had from all the way from Dr. No, and, you know, they found the formula with Goldfinger, moving forward with Thunderball, and, you know, You Only Live Twice. I think it might have been slightly weird to suddenly get this dramatic one out of nowhere with that same Bond. And, you know, fans of the franchise at that point, they might have gone, oh, it's another Bond film with Connery, this is fine. But some might have gone, well, this doesn't feel like Bond. This isn't kind of what I signed up for. So I think the fact that they did recast and we have Lazenby, a one and done, a film in the franchise which, as you mentioned, until at least Casino Royale, where you do get that real drama with the James Bond character, feels almost out of place. It's like a sort of like diamond in the rough, really. It's just this very random film that sort of splits apart Connery's tenure as Bond. And it is so unique to it that I think that it needed a breath of fresh air, really, with a different Bond. And I think it sort of like gives credence to the film as a standalone film as it is, even in terms of continuity with the franchise as well. And, that's a whole other discussion, the continuity in the James Bond franchise, whether it's all the same character, whether it's sort of like different iterations and adaptations of the same character, which is the way that I view each different Bond. But the fact that it is meant to be in continuity, but there's multiple moments where it does break from the pre-established story. The fact that Blofeld as a character doesn't recognize Bond. And I think that's down to the fact, and I think I read somewhere when they were adapting this and they wanted it to be true to the book, of course, the James Bond films are told completely out of order from the Ian Fleming book counterparts. So the fact that Blofeld doesn't recognize Bond probably makes sense in the sequential order of the books, but when you get to the films, especially following it straight up after You Only Live Twice, it makes no sense at all if you are like really like devout about the continuity with the James Bond franchise. I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true, one idea they were playing around with in the early script was that Bond would undergo reconstructive surgery, like plastic surgery, so that he appears different, and that explains the reason why Blofeld doesn't recognize him. I think they abandoned that concept clearly. It's fine because I very much do view this film as its own standalone piece, and I quite like the freedom that some directors get as well. You've got the director, Peter R. Hunt, who I believe was an editor on the previous Bond films. I don't know if he was like second unit director on some of them as well, but I like that they gave him a chance to sort of, he clearly had a story he wanted to tell. He had a vision that he wanted to bring to the James Bond films, and he bought it. I'd compare this in many ways to From Russia with Love in terms of tonally, it feels very stripped back. It feels very much more like the gentleman spy kind of story, and that's what I love about From Russia with Love. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Goldfinger, I love the Bond formula and everything that, when a new Bond film comes out, it's like, right, who's the Bond girl, who's the new Bond, what's the Bond theme, and all the ingredients of it, what are the gadgets this time? But there is a beautiful subtlety to From Russia with Love, and I think they were bringing that approach to this film as well. And I do really like that take on it. So, again, I'm kind of waffling on with this one as well, but I do appreciate this film. And I think, like From Russia with Love, I don't think it was met with negative criticism when it came out, but I think it was probably mixed and some people were quite unsure with it. But like From Russia with Love, it's one that over time, critics have completely changed their opinion on the film. And I think quite rightly so. I think this is one of, we keep throwing the word out unique, but I genuinely believe it is. And it does feel like a breath of fresh air. I would love to see more dramatic Bond films like this. And sadly, for better or worse, the movie that followed this, Diamonds Are Forever, it did kind of go back to the familiar, even down to the Bond. It felt like they panicked almost and was like, they're not taking to it. Get Connery back. People remember
and
Connery.
Shirley Bassey and
Shirley, exactly.
And Guy Hamilton. Yeah, they just sort of panic stations, I think, and went back to what they knew. But before, I don't know, we've got a lot to talk about, but just taking it back to the pre-credits sequence that we were talking about, I think the one thing that I always say about on a Majesty's Secret Service is it's one of the most beautifully shot James Bond films. Yeah. The cinematography in it is absolutely stunning, and that opening scene on the beach, I think Michael Reed is the cinematographer, but that opening scene on the beach is so blue and the colors are just so beautiful. The color, some of the daytime matching is a bit off in places, but just from that opening scene, it really does sort of make itself make a case for it being the best shot James Bond film. And then I think later on, obviously when we get to Piz Gloria, I think just the location there really elevates it above everything that we've seen so far, and again just makes it stand on its own, I think.
Yeah, I'm kind of echoing both that and Chris's comment. I think when you the direction they have and what they're able to do, that one of the, as Chris, you said, the beauty of Bond is knowing the ingredients, what's going to come. I remember when I was sort of hyping up Spectre before, I was like, oh my God, look at these Bond cars. We've got a henchman in Batista. We've got Blofeld coming in. We had all these amazing things to tick all the boxes. And then I loved it the first time, and sort of down the line, I was like, Skyfall's the one for me, not necessarily Spectre of the recent two, and it's one of them where I think you have to sometimes sit in awe of. They didn't try and copy everything that's been done before. They wanted to have their own Bond, and I think that's where this one stands out for me more than anything is the direction. The fact that the opening third of the film, he doesn't really spy. It's very much a love story with him and Tracy, which I think is the fundamental part. And obviously when he does go on the mission, when he does eventually veer out, I always think it happens every time I see it that, oh, we've not seen Tracy for a while, and then he gets the skiing scene and she's there, and I think that's what's done so well, where you can feel that this has had I don't say a better pre-production because it's still come out pretty much perfect for me, but the fact that they build up a relationship, so when one of them's not in it for 20, 30 minutes, you know that they're going to come back, and when you know about the ending, that it's all been built up so well over the course of 2 hours. And I think it's worth mentioning as well that this is one of the longer Bond films at 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I think a lot of the time it can be very much, oh god, it's long. Thunderball was probably that for us more than anything, but this is one of them where it just flew by. You get those moments, I think, because it is focusing on character development and the mission, not action, not spectacle. You get those moments where when it does want to have the action, especially the ending, it looks so much better than some of the other films because we've not had an overdose of it. We've not had it every so often that it's like, okay, we've not had an action for a while. When the action scene comes in, it's been well done, it's differently. And I think I kind of mentioned this in the last one, the helicopters, but obviously this would have been a combination of budget with technology at the time, but the direction quality gets better and better for those big moments. When we've got I think, Chris, did you compare it to Apocalypse Now when I texted me this morning when the helicopters roll in at the end?
I want to see that done.
Sunset. Right. Yeah.
Someone's got to have made that with the music playing over it, definitely.
Yeah, it just looks so well. And I know this is a kind of nap that this is one of the Bond films. Bond films to me, this is a really side piece, but half of them to me are ITV. Growing up with them, you turn on ITV, and at some point, you're at some point of a Bond film. And I could never tell you what one they were until probably about sort of 10, 15 years ago. The ones that weren't Brosnan, sort of Moore and Connery blended into one for me growing up, same with Dalton. And I always remember the end scene of this, and it wasn't until sort of post-Inception, post me getting madly into film, and I was like, oh my words, like this has inspired Nolan, who's obviously my favorite director, and all that kind of stuff. I think we spoke about last year on the Inception video for the Nolan month that the whole on a Majesty's Secret Service. We always say Nolan is when's he going to do Bond, when not if, and all that kind of stuff. And you go back to this and think, what an incredible, I know it's jumping in, but for the whole finale, the direction of it, you can see why this has inspired future filmmakers. And to me, to this day, why this is more of James Bond as a whole, but to me, this is the pinnacle of British filmmaking. And I sit there I'm not patriotic often, but when people bring up James Bond, that's the time for me to get the flag out and start waving it, because there won't be many other times. It's always Bond for me. Ironically, an Australian James Bond for this one, the only non-British Bond, which I think that's going to be a rule going forward. I know we've had Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish, English. So I guess it's going to be who's going to be the next one. That's a conversation for later on in the no doubt. I think it's time to talk about Tracy, who is played by Dame Dana Rigg. To me, this is top 3 Bond girls. Sitting up there with, don't know if Electra King counts, but her and Vesper for sure for me over the years. And I love her in this. I think she's great. I think because, as I mentioned, you've got the whole build-up of their relationship. We have her at the start. Obviously, this is almost stage. I always think of Titanic, when you've got the person that they meet trying to commit suicide and saving them, and moments like that. I don't know why that's images in my head of Titanic, but I always think of that, and it kickstarts this relationship. And I love the fact that Lazenby's Bond is built around her character. The mission didn't come before she did. She was very much the beginning of one, and that's what I always found interesting, was their previous connections with one another. But I think as she grows, she becomes, certainly in 1969, the only Bond girl that to me stands sort of, I don't want to say toe-to-toe with Bond, but you could imagine her going off and doing her own things. Like, yeah, I trust her to come back in one piece. I think Pussy Galore the only other one for me at this point of the films that could also do that. But I absolutely love Tracy, and I think it's also one of those cursed characters where some of that fame and legacy comes from the ending of the character arc as well, which is one of the most poignant moments in the entire franchise. But just as a starting point, easily one of the best performances from a Bond girl.
Yeah, I think Diana Rigg obviously brings a lot to this, and she obviously following Honor Blackman as the second Avengers star to join the series. It sort of was a rite of passage, right? And then obviously get Patrick McNee later in the Roger Moore years. Not quite a Bond girl, but I think there is another Avenger. I'm just trying to think of this now. There is a third Avengers star who I think pops up later down the line, but I can't remember who it is. But yeah, she's great. I think my only issue with Tracy is that I think the relationship and its origins through Draco are problematic. I don't think there's any two ways of putting it. Like, Draco is obviously her father, but he wants Bond to seduce her to save her life, and that comes from the book, right? But I don't know. It hasn't aged well. Let's just put it that way. But I think beyond that, if you can put that to one side, which I think you have to, and put it down to its time, then yeah, I think she's fantastic. She elevates this film entirely to another level. And I think if you hadn't had that strong performance, then it might not have lived on as long in the memory, because by the time the final act comes, you are invested in it. And I find that final act just gives me shivers just thinking about it. It's devastating. And it is, you're right. It's the moments throughout the film that builds up to it. She's just got so much sass and attitude. And when she turns up at the bullfight in that outfit, like, who turns up in that outfit? Like, she just looks amazing with the hat. I don't what even is that outfit? I don't know. But she looks the part. She is certainly a great actor as well.
Yeah, you mentioned it being problematic. The whole romance and the whole situations, it's almost framed as like a taming of the shrew kind of situation at the beginning, how she's this unruly, not spiteful character, but she's very willful, and it's like, oh, we need to marry her off to James Bond, so that, I think it's like a direct quote, so that she needs taming. And I just kind of watch this, and as I have with previous Bond films, I go, it was the 60s, not condoning it, but obviously that was very much the like and mind at the time of these films. I think we've said that a lot of the early James Bond films, we just kind of waft a hand and go, oh, it was the 60s, and they kind of get a free pass. But I think they do make up for that, and I think Diana Rigg is just incredible. Watching this, head and shoulders, at least the ones that I've seen so far, best Bond girl. And I'd say in terms of the maturity that's brought to the character, granted, there's quite a lot of Bond films that I still haven't seen at this moment. I would say the level of maturity brought to the character in terms of the writing and just how she plays it and how they treat the Bond girl in this film probably wasn't equaled or matched until Vesper from Casino Royale, who is still my favorite Bond girl out of all the ones that I've seen so far. But I can understand why Diana Rigg has so much love with the fans. Obviously, the tragic ending, which we'll definitely talk about the ending of this film, because that absolutely stays with you. But the way that she, conducts herself in the action scenes, you believe it. And I like how they bring more of a focus to the Bond girl. I've always said that the previous Bond films that we've reviewed so far, the best ones are always the ones that integrate the Bond girl in a dynamic way into the actual plot of the film. Ursula Andress is an absolute classic, from the original Bond film, Dr. No, don't get me wrong, but she accomplishes absolutely nothing in that plot. She is literally there just to be seen and not heard, essentially. And, the ones that we've talked about, Domino, for example, who actually do influence the film. I always keep forgetting the name. I do apologize. The one from Russia with Love, who actually saves Bond at the end. So they get stuck in more into the plot, and they're actually necessary to the plot. I love their romance, and I like that the film, especially the first act of the film, takes its time to develop that romance. It's not just sort of like thrown in halfway through. We don't have loads of Bond girls. The formula is usually you have the good ally Bond girl, the villainous one, and then the one who kind of ends up sticking around at the end to be the Bond girl for the finale of the film. And, you do have the Angels of Death, I suppose, which might fit that bill, but not in the same way. It is very much Diana Rigg all the way through. I love the chemistry between the two of them. And obviously, when we get to the end and James Bond yet again marries someone, which doesn't go well, which I think will become a trope as the series goes on, you really feel it. And I think it's all down to, it's down to Diana Rigg, absolutely. But it's very interesting that you have Lazenby, who was very much a newcomer to acting with this film, offset with Diana Rigg, who was such a a seasoned actress at that point, as you mentioned, like coming hot off the heels of the Avengers. It's an interesting pairing, and I think it works well. And despite what you might read in terms of the behind the scenes, whether there was some animosity between the two of them or they didn't see eye to eye, it doesn't come through on screen. And I think you do genuinely really buy that romance. I do think they fall in love relatively quickly, but there was a montage. We don't know how long that montage went on. That's the beauty of montages, I guess. But it's such a stark contrast to the Bond films that we've had previously. And it does feel like a breath of fresh air in terms of how they handle the Bond girl, despite the, as we mentioned, the problematic sort of origins of the character, the initial setup of her.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think as well, when she does come back, I think it's the right entry point. That it would have been weird if she just popped up on the mission and was with him with all the angels of death and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, if they brought her back into the film too late, then I don't think that works with the murder at the wedding. So I think being in the action chase and the fact that we get her with him in that finale when we've got the skiing resort and her trying to go after Bond when the dad leaves him to die a little bit later on, I think the timing of her returning, I think, is a really big thing to work in this. But absolutely, Dana excels it. And with Lazenby, performance-wise, it's probably the weakest Bond, politely put. I mean, of the six, mainly because he's had one performance to show. He didn't get time to develop like some of the others, and he also didn't get time to deteriorate until he was older than I think the Bond girl's mum, like View to a Kill. Different conversation. But it's one of them where sort of jumping to the end point, that's Lazenby's best scene for me. Is the way he handles the death with the silent policeman who I always kind of laugh at. I've got no idea why. It's just ridiculous for me to laugh at that. But I was after that random cop that just pulled up that doesn't ask anything for her, but irrelevant side piece. No, I think the pair of them work much better. And exactly, I think because of the garlic stuff that you read about online, it's very silly, but I feel that adds another element to the film. That because there are whispers of did it happen, did it not, I feel as if that adds so much more to the final outcome, that on screen they come across fine. It doesn't look like they've got issues. It doesn't feel like, when you've got some actors and actresses that when they're on set together, they might be great individually. In the moment they're paired up, you can tell the chemistry's off. I don't have that with them, and I think that's a really big thing. And it shouldn't be a hard thing to sort of get done in a film, but it does happen in big films as well. And certainly with the previous Bond films, it's always been about let's bring in the supermodels, the models, and many of them are also dubbed at the same time. And whereas this was like, it's lovely to get an actual actress come in and perform. And I think with Dana Rigg as well, obviously she passed away last year, but I think when we see her in sort of entire career, many newer Bond fans maybe will have known her from Game of Thrones, and I think that adds so much more to it because she's had such a wonderful career. It's amazing to look back at some of those earlier roles. I mean, I never got to see the original Avengers series, but I remember my parents had a DVD collection of it. It's really strange, but I think that's where, to me, Bond starts to separate, that when you start bringing in the actresses. I know it sounds stupid to say, but with it being such a male-centric production, is that I don't even think that's an understatement, an absolute truth. The Bond girls have always been there to be looked at rather than to be sort of used for anything else. I think that's where them trying this with this film, I think, does go a long way, and it's a very long way to go considering how quickly it recedes in the next couple of Bond films. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah. So should we talk about the ending? Should we talk about? Yeah. I think we need to talk about sort of like the ending with the whole death scene. I knew this was coming, as I mentioned. I have seen this film before, so it wasn't a surprise to me. But I was sort of watching it, going through them sequentially again, just sort of gives more resonance to the ending of this one for me, and especially because it is so different to the previous Bond films that we had. I even got misty watching this today. When that moment hits, and I think that Lazenby, he's probably not my favorite Bond of the ones that I've seen. I do think he could have developed into a truly great Bond, especially, my God, if he'd have been on for 7 films. He really needed to fire his agent, the guy who said that when they hit the 1970s, the spy genre is just going to be completely gone. I don't know if Lazenby regrets not staying on as Bond, or if he did kind of go, I should have stayed with that for 7 pictures. Imagine the money he could have made off it. My God, like, just stick with him. Even if you don't care, just stick with it for the money. But the beautiful performance he brings at the end, it's a very subtle performance, but it carries with it so much emotion. And there's no moment where he's like hysterically breaking down in tears. And I don't think you need that. I think that would be very much out of character for Bond. The fact that he's so good at sort of like repressing his feelings, but you still manage to get those nuances of the performance and the subtlety to it. It's a very stark ending to the film. And it says so much about the Bond character as well, which I don't think we would get again, as I mentioned, until Vesper, where luckily with like the Daniel Craig films, they kind of went with approach where each one did sort of like sequentially follow on from the previous one. And, you know, when No Time to Die comes out, I'm sure you can have sort of like a complete bracket of a story that's being told with his incarnation of Bond. The fact that he does emotionally shut himself off after Vesper dies in that film, and you can kind of see the precursor to that film with this one, I think, at the end. It's beautiful. I will say the one thing that does kind of take me out of the moment, which I did forget about, is that you have this beautiful moment with like the freeze frame of the bullet hole in the windscreen, and then da-dun, 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 and the Bond theme kicks in full statement, and it did kind of take me out of the moment. I wish it had have just segued back into we have all the time in the world, just to really let that emotional beat sink in and carry that with you, or even just silence maybe, just to keep that moment with you. But no, we get the Bond theme in full statement, and it's fine, and it does remind you that, yes, we are watching a Bond film. It's fine. It did kind of, it was almost like tonal whiplash watching the end, but it's such a beautiful scene. And I think easily in sort of like the legacy of Bond, it has to be sort of like one of the top scenes. It's such a unexpected ending as well. We'll talk more about the marriage itself in a minute, because there are a lot of beats to the actual marriage itself that I really love, that I think are worth mentioning. But in terms of that final death scene, it's horrible, because I love Diana Rigg in this role. I love her character, and she didn't deserve to go out like that. And I'm getting it was horrible. It was a very emotional experience for me watching this film earlier today.
Yeah, well, I want to ask. Oh,
sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I think the big thing of this scene for me is the build-up. That we've got the car behind them beeping the horn, that they're married, and if you're going to have that expectation of something to happen, you would assume it would be this. It's not really a chase, but he has to pull over, he takes the flowers off, and then the drive-by shooting happens. And I think that's the shock of it, is that you just, whether it's a film thing or not, you'd imagine that this lingering moment of all these other cars nearby, that would be the moment for a drive-by shooting. But no, it's the quiet after moment where we also have the unforgettable image of Blofeld in the neck brace, which I always laugh at. But I think that adds to it, is the shock of the moment was that it wasn't expected, because we've had that already. So that's what I was going to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, that final scene is fantastic, and you've got to say that that Tracy signs her own death warrant by promising, you know, asking for 6 children. I mean, it's just that moment where, you know, well, she's going to die now, because she's talking about the future. It's just, it is signposted so beautifully that, yeah, when it comes, it is really shocking. And I've got to, I think what you said about the theme tune kicking in, it is always a huge shock. But I think what it really does set up is that James Bond will return, and he's going to be on a mission of vengeance, right? And that's the great tantalizing what if again, because the plan was, you know, Blofeld would return, Irma Bunt would return, Lazenby would return. It'd be the next film would be a Quantum of Solace style mission of revenge, and what that film could have been, with that emotional beat and into the next film, it just it's staggering. We basically got the James Bond's Empire Strikes Back with no Return of the Jedi. We just didn't get it. It just never happened, and so that's why it stands alone on its own. Could you imagine if they finished Star Wars at Empire Strikes Back? You'd just be like, well, what happens next? We got to know. We've got to find out, and we just never find out, and that's a huge shame. And I think obviously that's where your continuity goes out the window. But yeah, it's fantastic, and made all about 100 times better by the music, right? We'll talk about the music, I guess, a bit later on. But that theme, that score, it just all ties together so beautifully in that final moment. I've never looked into it, but I guess that the song was there while they were filming, or they had the song, because he talks about all the time in the world. I don't know. It's unusual, because they normally finish the film and then the theme song gets sorted out, but maybe they had it beforehand, I guess. I don't know, but yeah, it's a beautiful moment. It always sort of reminds me a bit of the Italian Job in that setting, you know, on the mountainside. And I don't know why I always think of those two films side by side, but Yeah, it's amazing, and Lazenby really does sell it. It's very understated, because what the marriage to Tracy represents is a future for Bond. It's a life beyond the murder and the On Her Majesty's Secret Service. You know, he's no longer, you would imagine, going to be in the service of Her Majesty, killing for, you know, Queen and country. But that's brutally taken away from him in the final moments. It says, you are not out of this life. You are still in this. And so then the theme song comes on and you think, yes, he's going to go out for revenge. We don't get it.
Yeah, and it's very tragic in that, not only tragic because, you know, Tracy, you know, her character dies, but the fact that you really want Bond to come out of this well. And, you know, he was retiring, he handed in his notice, and he just wanted to build a life for himself after everything that he's done. And it's a future he can never have. Like, he's so in deep, and the amount of enemies that he's made, and, you know, he's always sort of like watching over his shoulder, and it is a stark reminder of that. And even though it is very much on its own in the continuity of the films, I think it's a necessary beat just to remind you of how complex the character of James Bond can be, if written accordingly so. And yeah, it is really upsetting for the character. I do want to mention the marriage, though, because I've always completely shipped Moneypenny and James Bond throughout all of these earlier films. I love Lois Maxwell and the qualities that she brings to the character and that interplay. One of the sweetest moments in this film, and I completely forgot about it until rewatching it today, the bit where he throws the hat to her. I love how she plays that moment. It's really heartbreaking, and there's sort of like this lingering, knowing look between the two of them. It's always sort of like played off for laughs, but it almost felt like this one actually had, you know, not like a punchline. That's not the right word for it, but they followed up with it. Everything that was built up and sort of that unspoken tension between the two of them, which may have been played for laughs in the previous ones, it finally had a resolution with this one. And I'm going to be interested sort of watching that again, because I know that she goes on after playing her in this. And that's what I mean, that the fact that the maturity that the screenplay brought to even the side characters, the fact that they would write a moment in there for Moneypenny's character, and even Emma as well. Like, M has way more to do in this, like those sit-down conversations that he has with Bond. It's not just like a couple of minutes at the beginning, this is the mission briefing, go and do it, Bond, and then we focus on him. He is, you know, part of the story. So I actually got to bring up the screenwriter. I should know this.
I think it's Richard Maybaum, isn't it?
That's it, yeah. Tremendous script for this one. I know he worked collaboratively on a lot of the other Bond films, but really came into his own with this one. And the amount of emotion he was able to bring to not just the titular character of James Bond, but every character surrounding it. It does feel like one of the most cohesive scripts out of all of them, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that is very much the writing feels more mature, and as the audience at the time, I think once you've crossed a certain amount of Bond films, everyone would know those characters tuning in. Of course, there'll be some people that'd be new to it, or in one or two of them, but I think this film has that moment where you feel as if this is a not accumulation of an era as such, but very much that we've been doing this for a certain amount of time now. So this, going back to Lazenby, this is just the new Bond. It fits in. Here's what he's done in the past. Here are the supporting characters getting their moments. And it's building up sort of with the marriage to that fond farewell that I always took the throwing the hat as a kind of resignation type message that, you know, that's his old life now with the hat, with them, with Moneypenny on the other side of it. And he's walking away with Tracy. And it's, of course, the doomed circumstances. And I think that's where the maturity comes, that the writing has a payoff. And I know they were adapting the book. I've not read the book, but it is one of those where you'd imagine that the screenwriters would have a lot of fun knowing what's going to come next. And I can imagine saying, okay, we know that she's going to die, so how can we build in these small moments that go a long way in developing the characters and giving them something new whilst being in that traditional formula?
Yeah, absolutely. And I often wonder as well, like, not to sort of like tarnish the image that I have of Moneypenny's character, but if she was kind of there, you know, hearing the news of this drive-by shooting that happened where Tracy was killed, and she was like, haha, James is back on the market now, he's mine. Like, if there was any of that going on, probably not. But I think we need to talk about the villain of this thing as well. You know, we've talked about that ending where the villain does get the final say, you know, beautifully put by Tom as well, sort of like the Empire Strikes Back of the series. Absolutely. The recasting of Blofeld, because, you know, we discussed Blofeld last week when we did You Only Live Twice. I love Donald Pleasance as Blofeld. He is Blofeld to me, that image. And we talked about the impact that Austin Powers has had as well, sort of like the image of that character, especially when you go back in hindsight, how you view that character now. But the recasting, so Telly Savalas, I think that's how you pronounce his name. I probably butchered that. I don't know. I quite like his depiction, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I couldn't imagine like a Donald Pleasance take on the character in this film. It's not the place for a comic book like villain. Now his actual plan is very over the top and is very over dramatic. The whole hypnotism thing, and we'll talk about the Angels of Death in a second. But I think he is very well matched with Bond in this. But I think it's the fact that, you know, Pleasance had so many ideas for the character. I think, you know, I mentioned last week when he took on the role, he wanted to give him a limp and like a hunch, and he brought all this physicality into the role. And granted, Blofeld doesn't have much to do. You know, he comes in very much late in the game in that film, but his impact stands the test of time with that film. Very different character, you know, like his appearance is totally different. And of course, that is a thing, that is a trope that continues with the Bond films. He is the master of disguise. He will change his appearance. He will change his actor from each film. And we'll have another one when we get to Diamonds Are Forever as well. But I think he works for this. He is like obviously like this huge like worldwide criminal mastermind and everything, but it's that understatement again to the character, which it does fit in tonally with the rest of the story and the performance. I'm glad I wasn't the only one that laughed at the Blofeld and a neck brace at the end. It is a very comic image, I think, but I think he works. I do prefer, if I'm going to sort of like rank all of the, I guess you can now, there have been so many actors who have played Blofeld over the years, but I would say Pleasance is still my favorite. I do have a soft spot for the people who originally play those characters, but I think he works for this. You know, it's the very deep voice and the very stoic performance he brings to it. It works for the film. But I like how Blofeld actually kind of gets stuck in as well. Granted, he is escaping, but you have those moments where there are action scenes involving Blofeld, which is, you would never have had that from the previous Blofeld in You Only Live Twice. So it's a new dynamic. It's a fresh new take. Obviously, continuity, just throw continuity out the window with this film. It doesn't matter. It stands on its own. But I like him. He fits. I just don't like him as much as what Pleasance brought to the role, I don't think.
I'm in a weird sense. I think because this is the Blofeld film I've seen the most, I think this is where maybe I've got some bias where I enjoy him more. He feels, of course, you know, in Your Own Type, he's the visuality of him as a villain is, who is this guy that they've hidden the face from for so many years that we must see? And you do get amazing reveal of the scar and all of those stuff. And I think maybe it's because of how I've sort of, as I've got older, appreciated more, but he feels far more not necessarily intimidating, but when Bond's having sit-down conversations with him and there's a villain in there and we're trying to find out what those purposes are, what are the gains, what is the plan, he feels far more intelligent as a villain. It sounds such a pompous concept for me to say, but I really enjoy him because I think when you get scenes where actors can just act with one another, it takes it to another level. And I think that's where I've always really enjoyed Telly's performance as him. And you've got some great imagery, and we do get the bobsleigh sequence, which we'll talk about later, which I love. But I think it's one of those of Blofeld where, because we've had a very, to me, basic introduction in the previous film, we want to get to know him a bit more in this, just progression, I guess, at its earliest. And I think the fact that he has been recast, and I think I said this last week, I don't know why, I don't know if it's unfair, but I always think about Imhotep from the Mummy films. I've got to say the original Mummy films then, and let's ignore the Tom Cruise one, but I don't know why I always go back to, like, I really have a craving to watch The Mummy now. I don't know why, but I love him in it, and it's not because of that. It's not just that, but I think that goes against the writing of the film. I feel that he's Head and Country written far superior to what we've had before.
We've done a whole episode of the James Bond A to Z on Blofeld, and I could talk about Telly Savalas in this film all night long. For me, there's just so much to say. I'm not a huge fan of Blofeld. I'll just put that out there. I think he's best when he is unseen and as a menacing figure stroking the cat. I think, From Russia with Love is, for me, is the sort of peak of Blofeld. And when he becomes, You Only Live Twice, Donald Pleasance, it becomes the cartoon character. Peter Hunt was the editor on You Only Live Twice, and then went on to be the director on this film, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and he was, from what I understand, very instrumental in getting Blofeld recast. Now, this is from him. I'm quoting Peter Hunt. This has no bearing on what I think about Donald Pleasence or his performance, but Peter Hunt said that Donald Pleasence was too mincing to be the Blofeld that he wanted. He said that he minced across the stage on You Only Live Twice. Obviously, Peter Hunt is famously the first gay Bond director himself, so he has a certain amount of license to be able to say things like that. But he felt that Donald Pleasence didn't have the presence to be the physical Blofeld that we get in this film, because he has a lot of action scenes to do, and what I think Telly Savalas brings to Blofeld in this is what you've said. It's presence, it's a virility. He tries to seduce Tracy, which could you imagine Donald Pleasence or other previous versions of Blofeld doing it? You just can't see it. But Telly Savalas brings that to Blofeld in this film, and every time he comes on, he might be more Telly Savalas than Blofeld, but he just oozes presence. There's just something about him. The way he smokes cigarettes is just fascinating. When he's holding the cigarette and he's just moving it around the screen. Do you know what I mean? He's like holding it. I've got the pen here, and he holds it like this, and then he takes a little bit, and he's just fantastic. And he's doing action scenes. How many of Bond's main villains get stuck into skiing? Like, it's just crazy. It's crazy. To me, he's brilliant in this, and also very supportive, from what George Lazenby says, of Lazenby on set. I think because he was one of the most established actors on set when Lazenby, they were I think they were doing lighting setups, and it would be Lazenby and Savalas. And Savalas, famously, someone had whispered something about George Lazenby being, a non-actor or whatever. And Lazenby and Savalas was like, this guy's going to act me off the screen. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, in front of the whole cast and crew, like, he really stood up for Lazenby and said, this guy is the real deal, so don't give him shit. Like, I don't know if I can swear, but like, don't give him grief. And that to me just speaks volumes of the man behind Blofeld. I think just Savalas, he was just a real, a class act, let's say. Friends with Cubby as well, apparently, and that's how he came to be in the film. I think he was a gambling friend of Cubby's or Harry's. I can't remember which one it was. But he really took Lazenby under his wing. I think there possibly were some personality clashes, but just those few anecdotes that you hear about him really makes him sound like a class act on set. So, I just love him in this.
Yeah, that's really sweet of him. I'm glad you mentioned like the cigarette as well. I feel like that was a thing for like old school Hollywood actors. There was a really sort of like glamorous quality to smoking in those earlier films, and the smoker's hand, I think, that I've always heard it referred to. But I didn't know that about him, that he stuck up for Lazenby. So that's really sweet of him to do that. And I do agree with both of your points as well, that watching Blofeld in this film, he felt sort of like the most, I'm going to compare this to sort of like Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, where you do have opposite sides of almost like the same coin, and they're perfectly matched with each other. And I got that impression more from this one. We talked about Blofeld in the previous film, where he is very much that almost like villain of the week, where he's going to escape to sort of like fight another day. You do get aspects of that character to this one, where he is sort of like taking off in the bobsleigh at the end, but he does get stuck in, and like those dialogue moments with James Bond do kind of sort of like almost equally match him in terms of the way that they carry themselves in the scene together. We do have other villains in this one as well. I guess sort of like the henchwoman of this film with Irma Bunt. I always forget her name. The henchwoman from Russia with Love. Very
Rosa
much.
Klebb.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Always reminds me of her. She doesn't get loads to do in this, but I guess she does deal the death blow to the Bond girl. So I guess, it's a talking point, right? We do need to talk about her. I do love the way she carries herself. She does have this sort of like very intimidating, sort of like Germanic presence, I guess, that she brings to the character. And I guess she's a talking point. I don't think she's like one of my favorite henchwomen in terms of like the Bond legacy, but I definitely think it's worth mentioning. She's not sort of I guess we're spoilt with the formula, right? Especially when you get to Goldfinger, you get people like these very colorful characters like Oddjob or Jaws that we'll get later down the line. And again, like another very understated one, like the early Bond films, such as From Russia with Love. I think the Angels of Death, we'll talk about those in a second, sort of definitely get, I think the name alone, Angels of Death, carries more. It is that sort of like very more cartoony approach, I think. I definitely think the way they're handled is probably the most cartoonish aspect of the film in what is otherwise a very subtle film. But yeah, Bunt, she obviously doesn't return, but yeah, that final shot.
I love her being the counterpoint to Blofeld. She's very matronly towards the Angels, right? That sort of seems to be her sort of position. I think if you'd left Savalas's Blofeld with him, he'd probably end up just seducing all these Angels. But I think if you put, he has to have a Bunt in there to sort of keep him away from them. Interestingly, the actor who played Bunt, Ilsa Stepat, she actually died not long after. I think before the film even came out. And I think the plan was to bring her back for Diamonds Are Forever and, you know, be the big return. And just sadly, she never got to do that. But I think she really has her. I can't even remember the henchman's name. You know, the bald guy with the big nose, very German sort of heavy. I think those three together. I think they're a brilliant trio of bad guys.
I think as well when you've got them on this. I mean, elaborate base is an understatement. It's the fact that up in the mountains and here's the sort of greatest villains. And as you said, it's the balance of having a Blofeld that, you know, can choose that he is there with words and she is the major force behind it. And going back to the Rosa Klebb comparison is what I always think of in design by look. And obviously in Rush with Love, she commands, I always forget the Bond girl's name as well. It's really bad. But it's that dynamic that...
Tatiana Romanova.
Yeah, that's it.
And I think
mouthful.
I think it's the fact that because the Angels of Death are vaguely similar in that concept, that it's not necessarily a sleeper agent, but it's very much that this is the person that's made them who they are and they're working towards that goal. I think that's where those comparisons come in. But I love the fact it's her. You get that always. I don't know if it makes me jump, but that moment where it's her lying in the bed in this film, when Bond goes to introduce her, I don't know why it always makes me laugh. I don't know if it's meant to be funny or weird or uncomfortable, but it does all of it combined. But I love her in this, and I do like the fact it's not Blofeld that kills Tracy. I think when you look at Blofeld as a character, I've always seen him as he doesn't really want to get his hands dirty, that there is a reason he has people working beneath him, and even him driving the car to me is a bit of a far-fetched for his standards, but I'm glad it's not him with the machine gun. But going back to what you said earlier, Tom, it goes back to that, you know, what could have been, you know, in a parallel universe somewhere, there is a Diamonds Are Forever that has Lazenby, that has the full cast and whatnot. And it would have been fascinating. I couldn't imagine how production sort of finished this film. And then obviously not to talk about Asher's death, that sense of things like what could have been, but it is very much that jumping back to Connery less than 2 years later for another film is that things didn't work out for whatever reason. Let's bring him back one more, and then let's go do something else with Roger Moore, etc., which obviously they go on to do. But I think that kind of helps this stand alone. That imagine if there was a sequel that didn't work out or a follow, and I think that's why this one works so well by itself. But it leaves some question marks open, and I think the villain side of it is, I don't want to say it's my favorite up to this point. 7 films in, I love Goldfinger, always have done. There's just something about him, and maybe it's because I also grew watching Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, who knows? But I think he is, to me, that definition Bond villain that I love. But I like it when you've got the supporting villains to go alongside them. Obviously, of course, Goldfinger has Oddjob, probably the best henchman of the lot, I'd say. But yeah, I don't know. The Angels of Death, I'm going to jump in straight away. Last night I found out that Joanna Lumley is one of them, which I had no idea about, which is completely in my mind. I don't know why. I think because I always remember from James the Giant Peach more than anything. That I'm just going to go in with that because I need to get that off my chest. I had no idea she was in this until yesterday. But the Angels stuff, very weird concepts. I don't know if it was very much a let's get some supermodels in, let him sleep with a couple of them, and probably a bit of that as well. And who wants to be a Bond girl, who would like this and whatnot. But I don't personally. We don't get enough of them to care. But they are essentially a MacGuffin. We need to find out where they are. That is the purpose of it. What is the plan with them? So I don't mind it, but it's very Bond. Go in, sleep with them all, and then carry on with what you're meant to be doing.
Yeah, I love Ruby Bartlett, the from Lancashire. I just love her. Angela Schooler, the actor's name is. Interestingly, she was in the 1967 Casino Royale as well. She plays one of M's daughters in that. But I just love her in this film. I don't know whether it's because my family's from Lancashire and the accent is just very evocative for me. But I just love her so much. She just got so much life to that, brings so much life to that role. And just the way she writes the number on Bond's thigh, you just need that moment of relief at this point in the film. I think, it's a far-fetched concept, but we've had jetpacks in this film. It's not that far in these films. It's not that far-fetched, is it? It's a good one. I think it's a classic Fleming plot, and it works really well. And I think the way that he's undercover at the time as Hilary Bray, and the fact that they all assume that he's gay. There's that sort of, oh, I didn't think you were interested, and blah blah blah, and then how he then seduces them. I just think all that works together so wonderful. I just love all these sequences. I think the film can be very much split into before Please Gloria and then everything afterwards. Yeah. But from this point onwards, with the Angels of Death, I think just the film just really, it's elevated because it's really high up in the mountains as well. But it is just it's on another level, and it all works together. And all that the hypnosis stuff with all the psychedelic lights. This film is 1969. It's the height of flower power, right. And it really starts to feel that at that point with these sort of hippie girls and the psychedelic lights and the hypnosis. It really just starts to really come to life, I think, at this point. But yeah, it's interesting that I don't know who the costume designer is, but I think whoever's done it, has done a fantastic job with the angels as well. They're all very individual, and it's almost like an action, like a Barbie set. Here's the angel from Lancashire. Here's the angel from Germany. Here's the angel. It's wonderfully done for me, anyway.
I'm guessing it's straight from the book as well, but it does feel like the moment where that is sort of like the producers coming in going like, well, we don't want it to adhere to the formula completely, but we want those elements in, as we mentioned, like, the good looking, the glamour models of the time coming in to play these characters. I love the concept of them that, they are sort of like sleeper agents that Blofeld is employing, hypnotizing them to sort of like spread. It's like a biological, I don't even know what it is. It's to kill all like basically the agriculture, isn't it? And sort of like livestock and everything to sort of like doom the world into an apocalypse. I love that concept of it, and I blame Goldfinger for this. I blame the Bond formula for this. We're coming hot off the heels of Pussy Galore's Flying Circus. I was hoping that the Angels of Death, especially with a name like that, you've got these group of like these badass women called the Angels of Death. And because I haven't seen this film in so long, I thought they were the people that are like skiing, like chasing after Bond. I thought we were going to see these get stuck in. These were going to be not like, well, kind of like henchwomen, I guess, like a group of henchwomen, and maybe in a completely different Bond film with a totally different tone that's more akin to the Sean Connery films. Maybe we would have got something like that, but they are instrumental to the plot, absolutely, but then they just kind of disappear. Like they serve their purpose and then they're gone. I don't know. I would have kind of liked to have seen them stick around a little bit longer because, as you mentioned, like they are very fun. It's that nice needed bit of levity to it, but especially with the whole hypnosis thing as well, there's that great moment especially with Blofeld's voice, that very deep monotone voice where he's talking to them over the intercom. It would have been nice to get a payoff to that where he instructs them to like kill Bond, and then you've got this group of women all going after him. I don't know. I'm rewriting the film now, essentially. That's not my place to do that, but I love the concept of them and it works for the story, but I kind of left wanting more from them a little bit. And again, I blame the previous Bond formula for that. I need to keep telling myself that this isn't that kind of Bond film, but there are kind of like the elements there where it's almost like dipping its toe into that sort of like familiar Bond territory. I don't know, maybe that's just me. That's totally just me. Of course it is.
No, it's a good point, because I think as well, whenever you get to the ending and Bond's taking the photos of their locations, and this will be down to, this is the 60s, there isn't CCTV, we can't track them where they were. I love the fact that it will like cut to each of the Angels of Death, like just in case you've forgotten who they were, it's like photo, put up on the screen for a couple of frames, then we go back to it. I like that kind of stuff. I love it when Bond, I think we said this, was it Dr. No? Or is it Goldfinger? When I said that the beauty of watching the old Bond films is seeing the technology that wasn't around at the time that we all carry on our phones with us today. And I love that kind of thing. And I know that certainly I would say that sort of with Q, Skyfall onwards, they've done a fantastic job of, sort of slapping the back to that this isn't this far-fetched extravaganza anymore because we've got it all with us anyway. But I love that idea that it was very much, we need to know where they are. And today, they'll do that in an hour on a computer in London somewhere. So.
Well, it's interesting that this is only the second gadget that he uses in the film, a miniaturized camera. And the one previous is when they're in Bern and he's cracking the safe with this elaborate safe cracking / photocopier that he uses. Which, again, coming from a film like, Thunderball, where you've got the car, you've got the jetpack, all that sort of stuff, the underwater breathing, all that sort of stuff. Really, when you think about that, from that film to this, the gadgets really have been taken out. And that's, again, talking about Connery, that's what he wanted. He wanted to go back to basics. And this was the film that did it. It's crazy to think that he walked away and then they made this film.
Absolutely. Right. I think that covers the villains. We kind of teased this earlier. I think we need to talk about it. Let's talk about the music to this thing, the themes, everything that goes along with it, the score itself. I know it's been a while since I've seen all the other James Bond films. I don't feel like I need to see them at this point. I'm going to go out on a limb. This is John Barry's best score for any Bond film that he's done. My God, I've just spent all of today listening to the orchestral version of We Have All the Time in the World. It's probably one of the best love themes. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that as well in cinema history, in all honesty. Even just hearing the music was getting me emotional, even before we get to that point in the film, just like when it's sort of like it's bled in really nicely into the background of the theme. It's that classic Bond sound. It still feels completely at home in the franchise, but the soundtrack just felt like it was taken to another level with this thing. And I don't know if that was sort of, subconsciously with the change of tone with the film, if Barry felt like he had more sort of like artistic freedom to bring something new to the table in terms of the score. You get those lovely little, as I mentioned earlier, where you see the old gadgets where it reminisces on the previous films, where he brings those sort of like orchestral beats into it as well to tether it back to the original films. But it's just tremendous. I mean, and again, breaking away from the formula, we don't have like any sort of like popular at the time singer belting out a song called On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I think that was actually one of the stipulations from Barry, was that can you write a titular song that's as long-winded as On Her Majesty's Secret Service? I've brought a lot of comparisons to From Russia with Love at this point, but it's very much in that similar vein in that, is there a real Bond theme to that film? Yes, you do have a song in there from Russia with Love with, Matt Monro, but it's not, played in full statement over the title sequence. But speaking of the title sequence, I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. It sort of like brings in a more electronical sound, which I guess was, 69 pushing closer to the 70s. That's just the way that music was heading at the time. But even, like the main theme aside, the actual new theme that's brought to the table, which is almost the way that it's played, it feels like this is a brand new sort of like main theme, almost like an action theme. Yes, you do still have, the James Bond theme played in full statement, but when it kicks in, it's like, oh, we're watching from on Her Majesty's Secret Service, baby. Like, this is going down right now. I'm not a massive fan of Louis Armstrong. I will say that we have all the time. Like, I'm not too keen on his vocal style, but the actual theme that was written for this, outstanding. And we always say that music elevates film. That's absolutely the case with this one. I truly believe that Barry way outdid himself with this one. It's a tremendous piece of music.
Yeah, I think with the Bond scores as well, certainly I've always put probably John Barry and David Arnold as the two big ones. It's when you get to this one, you get that credit sequence, and it's not the voice. And I think because it's so synonymous with me, I always think, We've Got All the Time in the World. I love that's one of my favorite songs. And I think Chris said it before we went live, that there are some songs to me that are bigger than the films they are in, that you feel as if one day you find out, wait, that was actually made for a film. I always think that Eye of the Tiger and We Have All the Time in the World does that for me. And it's always strange when I watch it, expecting it at the start and at the end, and it's neither. Of course, it's played in it, and it's said many times. I think it's said in the book as well. But I love the score for this. Of the ones we've done so far, it's by far the best. I think after the main theme, of course, nothing's going to ever get close to that in terms of Bond, I think. But when we have the skiing slope, this really tragic, but it's always been on my like sort of gym playlist whenever I would go and stuff. And it's not that there is skiing equipment to do anything like that, but you can imagine if you were skiing one day, and I don't know if people can listen to their music whilst they ski, who knows, but it's one of them where like that would be pretty intense. And certainly when you get to the action scenes later, the score really comes in. It's coming on the dramatic scenes. And I think you get some films, not necessarily Bond, but some films can do action great and the sort of drama side not so good, and some can do drama great and not action. And I think the perfect blend of being able to do both is where this one really stands out by itself. And I think you've got two of the best Bond themes from the entire series, in truth, in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the On Her Majesty's Secret Service theme it's fantastic. It's one of Barry's best pieces, and you say he peaks at this point, but I would got to say he does keep on getting better with the film. So you've got that to look forward to. Mm-hmm. For me, this song, you guys must have heard it, but the Propeller Heads remix, which comes out in the 90s, which they did with David Arnold. I think I was more familiar with that than this film at that point when this came out, because this is a film I came to a lot later than the others. But that version is insane. And interestingly, later on, The World Is Not Enough, I think they used that theme to score the film as a temporary track. So it comes on later down the line. It's becomes such an iconic piece of music for Bond that, yeah, it comes up down the line. And I really wish they'd bring it back, use these refrains more, the John Barry refrains in the films. I guess it's because the composers want to use their own music, but this and the 007 song from Russia with Love as well.
Yes.
One as well. From the fight, the sequence, the fight sequence in the gypsy camp. They're, to me, as important to Bond as the theme. But you can't understate this. And then we have All the Time in the World. You're right; it transcends this film to be just a great piece of music, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I mean, you talked about the accompanying action scenes as well. If we talk about the action scenes now, sort of the major ones, I remember when we did our review on Thunderball, I mentioned that, for better or worse, we did have our problems with Thunderball, namely sort of like the very slow pace to the action scenes, the underwater segments, but it does have an identity of its own. It may be possibly a gimmick as well. It's like, oh, it's the underwater one. When we get to this one, I go like, oh, it's the skiing one. But, where I think this film excels compared to Thunderball is that the action in Thunderball does get very samey after a point. There's only so many times you can see a bunch of sort of like faceless people in scuba diving gear kind of harpooning each other, and it just kind of levels out and you're watching the same thing play out. This one, you get multiple skiing sequences, you get car chases, you get a bobsleigh chase. So although it's predominantly set in the one location with the film, they get so creative with the action scenes. Oh, have we lost George? We may have lost George. I'm going to keep going anyway. It's fine. You get multiple scenes with the skiing, but they keep it different. The way that it's shot, the cinematography, the way that it's edited, it doesn't feel samey. It's not like, oh, well, we've just had one skiing scene and now I'm just watching the same thing again. And I think, partially down to the music as well, keeping that energy level up to it. We'll talk about the one-liners in a second. That's a segment that's my favorite part of the show, is where we go into the one-liners for each Bond film. And surprisingly, this film has one-liners. I didn't think that Lazenby had any one-liners, but there's some great ones. The action scenes are so good. You still get those moments as well where you have like the rear projection, which is very 60s. And, I do think that is a charming quality to films from that decade and from that era. And the little miniature of the guy that falls off the cliff, and we're watching this little figurine fall. I love it. I love stuff like that. It's always charming for these kind of films. I want to say probably like one of the longest falls in like cinema history as well. Like that's a lingering shot.
It's too long.
Yeah. I think, cut it down a little bit would have. It's clearly a figure when it's falling down. It's fine. I love it. I'm going to accept it anyway. But the action scenes are tremendous in this film. The way they covered it, the professional skiers they got. I think they even had some people that I don't know if qualified or were part of the Olympics involved in this thing, and it shows. It's tremendous. And we mentioned Christopher Nolan earlier as well when we were talking about that. Obviously, I'm way more familiar with Inception as a film compared to this one, in that I've seen Inception way more times than I have seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service, knowing that Christopher Nolan was inspired by this film. But after watching this today, I think that, homage and tribute kind of transcends into almost plagiarism in some parts. I know the story is completely different to Inception, but you have this, this building, this complex in the middle of, the mountains and the skiing segment. it did kind of transcend that level. But it's nice to sort of go back and see films that, you know, modern directors were inspired by, and quite rightly so. The way that the action was covered in this is just tremendous.
Yeah, action-wise, this is right up there again. Advancements in technology, budget, being able to bring in those people, and maybe even familiarity with the franchise that people would be interested in. But the whole skiing stuff, I love. Have to talk about the fall as well. Whenever it happens, I just sit there in amazement. It feels like a joke, you know, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but it feels like there's. You said it to me this morning. Actually, you're waiting for the one-liner after it, and nothing's said. And I wonder if they're on set one day and they're like, you know, it'd be great if we just like sent. I don't know how they would have done it. Maybe they had like a model or something. But I wonder if they had like the cinematographer was like, I just love to just to track someone fall down, and maybe it's like an experiment that went a bit too far. But the fact that we get the hit in the ground part, the sound effects, I love all of it. I think that they do it in 2 shots as well. I love it. It's silly, it's bonkers, but it's that kind of over the top exaggeration I love about the Bond films. I think a big part of the history of Bond is that over-the-top death. Who's going to be, not necessarily every film, but so many of them is like, what's going to be this insane moment that not just Bond can get with, but something that kind of pops. It's a bit like a Wilhelm scream, right? You love them when they pop up, and you're kind of thinking, if it does come up, and we're going to have a laugh. And certainly with the Bond films, I think this is the one that delivers maybe too much with that moment. But we do get some other great insanity deaths, mainly being always remembering the image of the snow turning red, which I think may be involved with Chris's one-liner. But
oh, yeah, definitely.
Action-wise, I think this has it all, and it's earned. I think sometimes some films can, I think we'll get to this maybe with Die Another Day, where they look at the action and then write a film around it. But this film very much feels like we've written this drama now. At what points can we put in the action scenes to counterbalance that? And this one had it all.
Yeah, I think you've got to pay tribute here to production designer Sid Kane, who basically built Piz Gloria from the ground up. He found the spot in the mountains. It was a half-finished restaurant, and they basically went to the authorities and got permission to turn it into the site that it is, and it is still now. So he basically did the inside and the outside, turning it into this incredible location. And I think this film really lives and dies on that location because of how beautiful it is and how real it is and how tangible it is. And then with the skiing scenes, you've got the introduction of quite a few key Bond players to bring these scenes to life. So, for example, you've got Vic Armstrong, who later comes on in the Pierce Brosnan area's second unit director. He's one of the stunt people in the raid. You've got John Glenn, who's shooting some second unit there, and he later then becomes the Bond director for, is it 6 films? I can't remember how many John Glenn, 5 or 6. And then you've got Willie Bogner Jr., who is as you mentioned, the Olympic skier. Mm-hmm. Who basically pioneered the way of shooting skiing on camera. He's basically the cinematographer to do that and bring skiing to life for audiences. And interestingly, in something that would be echoed in A View to a Kill, when Roger straps on the skidoo ski and does it on that and basically invents snowboarding. But George Lazenby does it in this by skiing down the mountain on one ski for quite a protracted period. And I think that's something that Bond does really well. It's not just let's just do a ski sequence. It's how do we make it the best ski sequence you've ever seen, with something new, with something different that you've never done before. And amazing to think this is the first skiing Bond film. It's incredible. Mm-hmm. I always forget that. You think every Bond does it, but Sean Connery never puts skis on, never. Like, he never does it. It's like Roger Moore never drives the DB5. It's like, you think it's throughout the series, but it's not. And this film, it absolutely nails it. Yeah, and you talk about the bobsleigh stuff. I think I might be wrong, but I think a stunt person died doing some of the bobsleigh scenes.
Yeah.
And that's how passionate they were about bringing this stuff to life. They didn't go at it half-assed. They really went for doing the very best that they could. And again, on this film, it just really shows. And you're right, that fall does go for too long. It just needs a shot of George looking at his watch, just like, like, this is going on too long. That would have been perfect.
Can we say that this is the second greatest bobsleigh film after Cool Runnings? I think. I don't know, maybe. But yeah, no, going to everything you said there, I love that about the whole production of the Bond films is that you know, they trust and they play into everyone's strengths, whether it be set design, whether it be location scouting, all these ingredients that, you know, have to come together to make a solid film, the stunt coordinators and everything, the cinematographers. Everything's just beautifully sort of like blended in orchestra with this film. And I do like that they sort of reach out to those people. They know when to play to people's strengths. And, you know, speaking of strengths, if we move on to our favorite scenes from this film, I guess I'll open with the one-liners. I'll get it out of the way first before we get into main scenes. It's my favorite segment of the show. And as I mentioned, I was actually surprised that Lazenby had one-liners. I didn't think he was that kind of Bond. I thought that was very much reserved for Connery or certainly Roger Moore. But there are two absolute zingers with this one. So I'm going to go for my runner-up one with this one. And it's when Blofeld smacks into the tree and he says that he's branched off. Love it. I was messaging you, George, as I was watching it, and there's my number one spot for pun for this film came in, and then I thought that was going to be it. I thought it was going to be a one and done. That branched off one came in. I was like, oh, we have a higher bidder here. There's another pun on the table here. But my favorite, unquestionably, is when the guy goes into the grinder and he says that he's got a lot of guts, or he had a lot of guts. Fantastic, absolutely brilliant. This is what I live and breathe with these James Bond films. But besides the one-liners, favorite scenes from the film, it's kind of ones that we've already talked about. It feels very weird saying my favorite scene of the film is where Diana Rigg dies, but I do think that the sheer impact and how unexpected that is for a film, almost like that twist ending, does sort of like stand head and shoulders above a lot of the rest of the James Bond scenes, and it is memorable, although it is very, very sad and poignant. And then besides that, I'd probably say the first ski scene where it kicks in with that on Her Majesty's Secret Service theme. It's just an iconic theme. It's an iconic moment, and it's just to see that first initial ski sequence with that theme playing behind it. I think that's pretty special. So they'd probably be my two favorite scenes of the film if I'm going to mention any.
Oh, it's hard. You are right. It's so horrible to say your favorite scenes of death at the end. I think the ending is the not even poetic. It's a kind of sad but beautiful scene that the film has built up to and earned. I think the key thing is that scene happened, and because the characters have earned that finale with one another, it doesn't not work. It works so well, and unfortunately, I do say that's my best scene, as horrible as that sounds. I'm trying to think of others, because I think the big ones for me is, of course, the skiing. I'm going to be boring.
Oh, he's so boring, in fact, that it's cut him off the stream. Oh, hang on. Sorry, you're back. George, you're back. Say it again.
Oh, am I back? Sorry.
You're back. You're back.
Mine's been playing up. I'm going to be boring and say the attack on the base. It's the Nolan stuff. It's why every 3 years I sort of sit there and shake my fist at the sky and say, when's Nolan directing Bond? What a moment. Again, the helicopter's coming, and you've had a great action segment, and you've had this build up. They've got to go and save Tracy. You're there emotionally with them, and you've got the dad. You've had the great, with the Red Cross. Do you want to let people die? Even the villain has a half conscience with that moment, and I just love how that scene pans out. And I think it is more than just that image of the helicopters. So I'm going to be boring and put another action scene in it. But I think when you've got a film that's consistently great, it's really hard to pick those standout ones because each moment builds towards something else.
Yeah, he's got a lot of guts. Is the best one-liner. When you're in out of context, it is the most gruesome death.
Yeah.
And visually realize that it could come straight out of a Saw film. It is ridiculous. I'm not going to choose that though. My favorite one-liner is when Ruby writes on his leg and Bond sits up straight and Irma says, is something the matter, Mr. Bond? He says, just a light stiffness coming up. You just say, I can't believe he's just said that. It's
only
brilliant.
In 1969, right?
Yeah, exactly. But my favorite scenes, I think I'm going to go completely left field. I love the scene in Burn where he goes to the lawyer's office to crack the safe.
Yes.
I think it's such a fascinating scene in that it's Bond doing spying. For one of the very few times he actually does some actual proper espionage work. And interestingly, something I learned recently, it's the first time that it rains on screen in a James Bond film, and the last time that it happens until Casino Royale in 2006. Wow. The only time it rains on screen in Burn. That's crazy. But yeah, he's doing the spycraft. He's got the other agent that he's working with. I always love it when Bond's working with another agent and they're having to work together. I love that. And then beyond that, all the stuff with M in this film, I think is beautifully done. Bond goes rogue in this film, like years before License to Kill, right? He goes off the charts. He's taken off the case. He goes off on his own, does all that stuff. He visits M in his house while M's classifying butterflies. All that stuff to me is just like, you know, it doesn't happen in other Bond films, but it happens in this one. And I just love all that. I love it.
Absolutely. And I guess that sort of takes us on nicely to our final thoughts on the film. This is very interesting because obviously I haven't watched all of the Bond films, so I don't sort of have the advantage of you two where you can view the entire franchise overall and see how this stacks up, because there are still so many that I haven't seen. I'd love this one even more on a second viewing, and I think this one would benefit from even multiple viewings. I think that the advantage of this film is that it is so isolated, really, from all the other James Bond films, and it does stand on its own as a solid standalone Bond film. Even, you know, from following on from the others, and there are moments where the continuity keeps on, but it is very much its own thing, down to the fact that we have a brand new Bond, a sort of more stripped back, subtle take to the Bond character, the fact that it is probably the most book accurate of all the James Bond films. It was a bold move from the production, and I would love to have seen what direction this would have gone in. We look at sort of like modern Bond now, from, you know, post Casino Royale, where we are getting this much more introspective take on Bond, and, you know, going into his backstory a lot more, and the things that make the character, the psychological aspects of the character. And, you know, maybe we would have got that for a Bond moving into the 70s had we have continued on like a sequential order from the tone that this one set. Or maybe it would have regressed and gone to like another formulaic style of Bond. I don't know, but I can see why this one may have been met with mixed criticism at the time. I think once you establish a tone and a formula for the Bond films, you know, people don't like change. Audiences don't like change. And we see that with modern franchises as well, with the Marvel films, for example, which do very much fit into almost like a uniform style. You know exactly what to expect from one. And I guess this is, you know, a comparison to audiences of the time with these films. They had got used to a certain rhythm with these films, and this one did kind of break the mold in that regard. That being said, one of the best Bond girls with this film, I'd have loved to have seen Lazenby come back for more and to see him really grow into the character. As it stands, I don't feel like I get enough of him to sort of like weigh up an overall judgment. I don't think he's one of my favorite Bonds, but he does bring some subtlety, which I don't think we've seen from even all the other Bonds, really, especially in that final segment. I think there's a lot to like with this one, and I think the fact that it is so unique is its biggest drawing point. And, you know, once we've gone through all of these films and done all the reviews on them, we will be doing a ranking video. I can see this one being up close to the top. I don't think it's as entertaining as, say, a Goldfinger would be, or one of the most formulaic Bond films, because we love those aspects to it. We love the formula to it. But I think this one would rank highly purely for the fact it is so ballsy and it is so different and it does stand on its own. So I guess that's kind of my final thoughts on this film. But I loved it on a second viewing.
Yeah, I can't copy word for word, but it's very much that Bond film where, you know, put what you expect to the side, not like a hype expectation, but what you're used to seeing. And let's go on a journey. Let's take it back to basics. There is Bond. He is a spy. He has a life. It's these these newer moments, and it feels like an origin film. And as we mentioned earlier, Casino Royale not necessarily takes bits of it, but Casino Royale obviously becomes the origin film sort of 40 plus years later, just 40 years, sorry. But this one, to me, it's been in my top 5 for many years. I'm re-ranking them as I go along. I'd be completely shocked if it isn't in that top 5. I'm sure it will be, but I think when you look at this as a Bond film, it's an interesting take on Bond because it is very much that George Lazenby. There was one actor that did one Bond film, and it's looking at that from an angle. And I think we sit here in the benefit of being 50 plus years later, but I think this film was many years ahead of its time. And I think, as you said, Chris, they had balls to do it. They shook up the system. Connery didn't return. And rather than make another carbon copy Connery film with somebody else, they went for something different. And this has it. So kind of echoing a lot of what you said, that to me, that this is one of the best films. And certainly from a study of Bond, this would be one that you'd want to investigate, look into in a mega deep dive, which I'm very excited for some people to cover as well. So, you know, obviously, if you would have seen it, because you wouldn't be an hour and a half into one of our videos if you hadn't. But this is definitely, I think, the Bond film that's going to be a comparison for many decades to come.
I guess in summary, for me, it is one of the greatest. It's definitely top 3 for me. I think that it benefits from being the one-off, the one-shot, because I think sometimes as a fan, you sort of almost become you sort of view a tenure of a Bond as in a homogenized way, and so sometimes the fact that it's a unique film makes it stand out as an individual, as being different, as being the one that is has something interesting to say. I think Lazenby is fine in this. He is wooden in places. I don't think he's helped at all that he's dubbed the entire time as he's Hilary Bray at Piz Gloria. That's not his voice. That doesn't help him in any way, shape, or form. And I think he could have grown into it. I think he was hugely misled by the people that were surrounding him at the time. And I'm sure he probably does rue the opportunity that slipped through his fingers. But I'm grateful that he made this one. It is often cited as the fans' favourite film. It topped a recent poll that we ran on the website that I run earlier this year. And I think just because it's just such a high quality film, and it is just that slightly to the left of all the other ones, and that makes it, unique in itself. But yeah, I just think it's fantastic. For me, it's one of the all-timers.
Yeah, very tough shoes to follow, I think, coming on from Connery. And I think Lazenby did well with what he was given and the lack of direction. But we will be returning next week. Those similar shoes will be returning with Sean Connery. He's got one more in the tank with Diamonds Are Forever. So that'll be next Tuesday, the 1st of June, same time again, 8 p.m. I don't remember many of the James Bond films that I've already seen, but I do remember that one being a distinct lull in the franchise. So I'm going to have a whale of a time going back to Diamonds Are Forever. Great Bond theme, though. And as Tom mentioned, there are elements to love in each James Bond film. So I will give it a fair shake. I will go back to it for a second viewing. But no, this has been a blast. I think this is probably one of our longest reviews that we've had on the Bond franchise, but that was to be expected with a new Bond, and especially this film being unique as it is. I guess I just want to say, a big thank you to Tom for jumping on with us for this one, especially, as you mentioned, being in your top 3. It's been great having, your input and your insight into this film as well, and the behind the scenes, things that I'd never even discovered before. So thank you for jumping on. I guess I want to hand over to you and just to talk a bit about the James Bond A to Z podcast and just where people can find some of your content.
Sure, yeah. Just ahead of Diamonds Are Forever next week, George, if you found Blofeld far-fetched driving a car, just wait until you see what he gets up to in the next film, because he goes in some crazy places. James Bond A to Z podcast, we started it at the start of 2021. It's an encyclopedic look at the people behind the scenes who make the James Bond films, in front of the camera and behind. We started with the letter A, and so for each episode we do about 6 different topics. So it's, a Bond, their name begins with A. So you've got Maud Adams, you've got Ken Adam, etc. And we're now at the stage where we're at the letter C. So we've recently done a couple of episodes on Casino Royale, and they've been our most popular episodes so far. The 96.7 one is a fascinating story. So I know you're not covering it in this podcast, in this show, but definitely worth looking into. You can find the James Bond A to Z podcast wherever you find your podcasts. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Google, we're everywhere. You could ask Alexa to play it, I believe. You can ask your Google speaker to play it as well. Our Twitter handles are at James Bond A to Z. That's ATOZ, as you can see at the bottom of the screen now. And yeah, I think every episode is different. We've got some fantastic ones coming up. We'll be doing a 2-parter on Sean Connery. We've also got a 2-parter on Daniel Craig coming up. And then we'll be doing our own Diamonds Are Forever and Die Another Day as well very soon as well. And then Dalton. I mean, we've just got so much to get through. We'll be doing it for quite a while. But yeah, it's been a great learning experience for me and the 2 hosts I do it with, Brendan Duffy and Tom Wheatley. We're all lifelong Bond fans, but we're all learning something new each week. Absolutely recommend checking that out as well. There's some invaluable insight on some of those podcasts. I've been listening to the Casino Royale one myself, the Daniel Craig one, not the original one, but there's so much. These guys go in depth, so definitely give them a follow. It's some incredible stuff. Nice companion piece listening to this as, I'm discovering these films myself, getting that, more information on it. So definitely give them a follow.
It's addictive. I'm just going to say this. I started it a couple of weeks ago and I've just finished the broccoli double bill. So that sounds so weird, broccoli double bill. People that don't know Bond won't know what that means. But everyone subscribe, listen. It's amazing. And there are Brosnan fans. That is the key here.
Yeah, I think the beauty of it is that it's evergreen, so you can join at any point, right? They're not tied to the weekly news cycle. Hopefully, when we finish, there'll be, you'll be able to listen to them in a whole, like at any time. Obviously, No Time to Die might be the blank spot in our knowledge because we haven't seen it yet. But yeah, that's the thing, and people are discovering it every week. So I think whatever era of Bond you're into, you'll find something interesting on each episode. Hopefully.
Definitely. So everyone check that out. And for those on our channel, thank you again for watching. We've had a blast with these. We're in more and more people commenting with us, letting us know our thoughts. And I think even though we're 4 months-ish away now from a very new Bond film, which is we've been 4 months away from it for quite a few times already. We're getting excited. So comment below your thoughts on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Want to know your thoughts on Lazenby as well. Diana Rigg, some of your favourite sequences, do comment them. We've loved the feedback on them. We've replied to all the comments. And of course, if you're new to the channel, if you're new to the series, if you like more than just James Bond, we do obviously do new releases. By the time this goes up, we'll have our Quiet Place Part 2 review out tomorrow, which is minor spoiler alert why we're not doing this live tonight, because we'll be watching it by the time this goes up. So do have a load of that. Our socials are Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterbox.com, and we have a link to that TeePublic store in the description below. But that is it for this week's. Again, Tom, massive thanks for coming on. I'm so glad to get you on. It's been incredible speaking, and I'm not going to lie, it's been the first time I've been scared to have a guest on the channel, just because we both assume all of our knowledge will be blown out the water, which it was. So thank you again. It's been incredible. And thanks to everybody at home for keeping it going. And we shall see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.